So we've set up our DSV with some tables that are real physical tables in our underlying databases, and one table that is just a named query. So it's not really a table underneath the database. So let's take a look at what happens to our data source view when the underlying data structures change. The most likely changes are that new columns will be added to the tables in the database. Occasionally, data types might change or columns might get dropped. So we're going to take a look at the effect that those changes have on our DSV in a couple of scenarios. The first is when we have a change to a physical table. Fact Sales, DIM Store, and CBSA are physically tables in the database, while DIM Store Manager is a named query. We're going to make a couple of changes to the underlying databases. The first is to this CBSA table. It has the county FIPS code, but it doesn't have the county name, so we're going to add the county name to that, and then we'll actually drop that column too. The second change we'll make is to drop one of the columns that this named query depends upon. So this named query, I added to it since the last lesson, and I had a brilliant idea that we should store the employee spouse name in our employee table. So I added that and did some initial population with it so that I now have an employee spouse column. The change I'm going to make is that my manager, or I should say HR, directed us that the employee spouse column was not a particularly appropriate column to have in our data warehouse. So I'm going to remove that from the employee table, and we'll see what that does at the DSV level. For our first round of changes, the first thing I'm going to do is drop that employee spouse column from the employee dimension. I'll do that by using some command line SQL. And then my command is done and that column is gone. The next thing I'm going to do is make a change to my CBSA table. That's in a different database, so I'll just make my life easy and choose reference data. And again, I'll just use SQL to add this. And why don't I go ahead and put some data in there. Currently, I don't know any of the county names. Okay, now let's go back to the DSV. When I have a table like this one, that's a physical table, all I need to do to recognize those changes and have them imported into the DSV is press this button up here that says Refresh Data Source View. That will give me a summary that tells me what changes have been made. So the county name was added. And sure enough, I can look here and see the county name. If I browse that table, I can actually see that unknown that I stubbed in there. The other change I made was to drop that column employee spouse. So that wasn't updated when I did the refresh. And what happens if I try to explore the data? I get an error message. Since that's a named query, it's not going to be automatically updated when there's schema changes in the database. So I will have to make any changes like that myself. These changes aren't difficult, you just have to remember to make them. Delete that column. Press OK. Browse. And that's fine. As you probably can guess, the changes to the physical tables that are set up on the DSV are going to be automatic. So to check that, I'll just return to my SQL command prompt, make sure my reference data is selected, and then I'll back out this change that I made here. Then when I return to the DSV, I can simply press the refresh button and I'll get a message that the county name has been deleted. I confirm that, and then I can see that it's gone from my dimension. So that's a quick overview to what happens to your DSV when the physical databases change. The rule of thumb is with the named queries, you really need to maintain those yourself. With the tables that are dropped onto the DSV from the physical database, those will be more or less automatically maintained, as would any views from the database that were dropped onto the DSV.